All right, we're going to get started. Ryan Castle here, the CEO of the Cape Cod Island Association of Realtors. Welcome to our first Zoomed In on Real Estate for 2025. We hold these every other month, so you can count on them on every other month from here on out, February, April, June, going forward that way. This is our reformatted membership meeting where we bring you what you need to know for the next 2 months, catch you up on what's happened as well in the last 2 months. And so, want to do this for you today. We've got a great guest in Joe Harris. He's the NAR Vice President of Government Advocacy for the National Association of Realtors, and really is the lead person working on Capitol Hill on our behalf. And he's going to talk to you about what NAR is working on right now in this new Congress going forward with the new presidential administration, and where the priorities lie, and what you can expect from the real estate front in that vein. But I've got a couple updates for you first. So let me walk you through some things that we've got coming on. Our upcoming programs. Want to talk about our upcoming virtual CE programming is this week, February 13th. We have due diligence in seller representation in residential real estate transactions. And they'll be going over all the new kind of forms that are out there in seller representation, and catching you up on everything you need to know around doing your due diligence and seller representation. And then on March 20th at 10 a.m., next month, we have short-term residential vacation rental CE class. So whether you do a couple, if you have some personally or some clients that you manage, or you do it at a more wide scale, or you're interested in taking on short-term residential vacation rental management, great class to kind of get introduced and started in the topic of what the requirements actually are in Massachusetts to handle short-term rentals. And then March 26th, the next week after the short-term residential vacation rental class, is contract law CE class. So please, if you're interested in those virtual CE classes, sign up today. Also in March is one of our 6 days of in-person CE this year, where we're ramping back up in-person CE, and we're going from 4 days in person to 6 days this year. And two of those are in March. We're doing two classes a day. So you've got transactions start to finish and understanding agency and disclosures. These are the core classes if you're interested in getting the Cape Cod Real Estate Specialist designation. These are the core classes for that, but also a great chance to kind of understand the whole transaction process. And so those are in person on March 12th at our office at 9 and noon. And we'll provide lunch as well for those that are sticking around or coming early for the noon class or staying late for the 9. Always chance to grab some lunch and mingle with other people in the classes. All right, tonight deadline is at 9 p.m. for the 2025 Leadership Academy. I would encourage you all to apply that want to learn more. This is a way, whether you're learning how to get more involved in the community, how to do more in your business, or how to get more involved with the association, touches on all three, and it's a really good holistic way to look at it. Most of the graduates have gone on to either be elected, serving on boards and town boards or commissions. A majority of our association realtor board directors and our MLS board directors are Leadership Academy graduates as well at this point. And it's been really a fantastic program to grow those leadership skills. So, and your involvement in the association and the community. So I encourage you to apply if you have not already. We revamped it a little bit to, as we continue to do every year, to broaden the program, make it better, make it more holistic, and bring better speakers into you. All right. Also, this Wednesday at noon, noon to 1:30, maybe 2-ish. We've got realtor party training, and Massachusetts Association of Realtors is coming in, talk about their advocacy agenda for the year. Some other programs they have. We'll be talking about local advocacy work that myself and Leslie Sandberg, our government affairs director, works on. We'll have a local select board person talking about what they're seeing regionally in the community, as this person's got some regional views and positions they hold, so you can kind of hear that. And best way to engage with select board members. So it's a a good day of training starting at noon on Wednesday with lunch. So come out at our office and take part in it. Thank you for that. And then also February 25th through the 27th, because it's virtual, we're doing half-day programs. When we do certifications or designations that are in person, we do full day length programs to shorten it. But in the webinar format, virtually, we want to kind of give you half days. So 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. each day is SRS, Seller Representative Specialist certification course. It's webinar format as well, so it's on our website to sign up for. And for those that brokers that came to our broker edition summit last week, you heard Jody O'Brien, who's teaching this course, go through some of the stuff she'll probably be talking about with listing agents as well in that course. So really good in-depth overview through the seller representative specialist. Also, mark your calendars for March 17th, right in the middle of tax season. So when you learn, man, gosh, I really got killed on my taxes this past year, or I don't really have the financial planning I need as a realtor who's an independent contractor making money off commissions. I really need to get my financial house in order. We're bringing an NAR webinar, but just for our members at 11:30 on March 17th. It is the Financial Wellness for Realtors webinar. It's just for CCR members here. While NARs puts out their own webinars, we want to do this and hold this just for you. So mark your calendars for this. Should be a great thing. You'll learn about secrets to contributing real estate IRAs for maximum growth, tax benefits designed to help realtors keep more of your own earnings, and expert tips for setting yourself up for long-term financial success. So it's a real strategy around making sure realtors, as salespeople and independent contractors and commission-based, are really centered for financial wellness in the future. Couple MLS updates I wanted to run by you too. Hopefully most of y'all have seen this. We sunset Flow Plan as the product went away at the end of last year, and we've launched a new partnership with Cubicasa. We brought the cost of floor plans down to zero. There's a $0 to do a floor plan in Cubicasa. If you used Flow Plan, this app is the same technology, and I'm hearing even simpler to use than Flow Plan was. Also, if you want to buy up on any products in there, we have a $25% off discount for our members that are buying in Cubicasa. So whether you're doing a 2D or a 3D, or you want to buy up to get the total square footage, because the room dimensions come with the base floor plan, but if you want total square footage as well, those get there. They also have gross living area, which is really important for appraisers. So if you have those floor plans, you'll be able to provide that to the appraisal in the process. So there's really some cool features Cubicasa's rolled out there. But free floor plans, so there's no reason a listing should be in the MLS without a floor plan anymore. Whether you're buying it through your photographer program or providing in the free version, and you can give your photographer access to this as well, and they can start using it as well. So any way you want to, it's available for you. Also, we got some MLS trainings coming up. So on tomorrow at 11 a.m., statistics at your fingertips. A little training on how to use statistics products in the MLS. On next Thursday, next week, we have a Cubicasa webinar where you can learn how to use Cubicasa and what some of the buy-up options are, things of that nature, so you can make sure that you're elevating your listings with floor plan solutions. And then 2 weeks from this week, on Wednesday, we have a Remind Docs Plus training. So if you want to learn how to use transaction management, one of the really big things we're hearing is around building out your buyer and seller packets. And Remind Docs can show you how you can create that packet so that every time you have a buyer and seller, you have the same documents in there for them, and other things on how to best use Remind Docs Plus for your transaction management, not just to find the forms. So that's available on Wednesday, February 26th. Later that day, we also have a quick tips on keep it current, effortless tax record updates, how to make sure you're keeping your existing listings updated with the latest tax information as the new year has started. And then the next day, another quick dips training from our staff is, have you heard the news? And they're just going to go over some of the latest function enhancements that we've rolled out for you through FlexMLS and other products so that you're caught up on what's latest. So those are all online webinars for you to sign up for on our website. Couple form and settlement updates for you. The Massachusetts Association of Realtors has rolled out some new forms and some new places for their forms. So Form 501, which is the contract to purchase real estate, I would make sure your forms platform and you're using the latest version as paragraph 2 has changed, compensation of buyer broker. Remember, this is the paragraph we added in the result of the settlement to add compensation of buyer broker, which is the buyer's request to the seller to pay the buyer broker compensation. So what changed here was at the end, it used to have some awkward line about the compensation is independent of, in addition to the offer made from listing broker or buyer broker, but there was no indication it was an accepted offer. So what we have here is that basically, if you have a broker to broker compensation form and executed and the listing broker is paying the buyer broker compensation, you would check box 1 and you put the percent. And then any additional percent you would be asking the seller for, or dollar amount, you would put in the paragraph above, in the lines above. That's for addition. This is just so that the line in that first checkbox plus what's above would equal what your buyer broker agreement's for. If you are not wanting compensation from the listing broker to the buyer broker, and instead your buyer is seeking the seller to pay all of your buyer broker compensation or a portion of it, but basically nothing from the list broker to broker compensation, all from seller to buyer agent compensation, you would check box 2 that says there is no offer of compensation made by the listing broker to the buyer broker, or that offer was rejected. So if you are not executing uh 311 and a broker to broker compensation, you would check 2 so they know there is nothing more owed than what's requested above. Are there MAR forms and updates? Net compensation has been removed from the MAR, from all MAR agreements, which is the listing agreement, contract purchase, etc. Because they realized they had not defined what net compensation, not a net listing, net compensation was, because it used to retain in all the MLS's rules and regs. Well, without compensation and rules and regs, they have almost MLSs have removed what definition of net means. In our listing agreement, the CCIR listing agreement, we have defined net, which is the same way we had defined it prior in MLS rules, and it does not include any payment to buyer broker compensation because it was the same definition we had prior. But that still remains on the listing agreement side to get paid for. The MAR contract, there is no net option. If you would like to get paid, if you want to get paid in the contract to purchase on the buy side via net, then you would need to write that in additional terms of how you're looking to get structured for defining net for that purpose. In Form 311, broker to broker compensation, they've updated to include mandatory arbitration provision. This should be circulated between brokers before there's an before there is a offer. If there is a listing broker offer compensation being extended and accepted, you want to get 311 signed, but it's been updated with those mandatory arbitration provision. And then also there's an updated area for to reject an offer. So say maybe the listing broker sends it over to the buyer broker. Buyer broker says, "Hey, I don't want to take listing broker. My company's not taking broker to broker compensation. I want to reject this offer. My buyer's going to ask for my compensation. Either pay me directly or ask for the compensation in the contract directly from the seller." Also, there's new change forms added in the MAR forms library. There's a termination of listing agreement, termination of buyer agreement forms, and change of terms added for buyer agreements if you want to change terms of buyer agreements without signing a new buyer agreement. On buyer agreements, NAR has come out with some tips on buyer agreements to comply with the settlement. So their position is a written buyer's agreement is like any other agreement. If you and your client agree to amend it and there's full transparency, and if you follow the settlement and state law, you can amend it. So some tips NAR gives you about that is remember, you can only be compensated as much as you and your client agreed to in the written buyer agreement. So if there's an offer compensation on the table from the seller or the listing broker that's more than the written buyer agreement, you can't take it. Compensation has to be specific and not open-ended, as we've always talked about. And the purpose of the amendment of a buyer's agreement can't simply to be to match whatever the seller is offering. So the idea is you can't just write a new buyer's agreement for every property you're looking at to match what the seller is offering. The purpose of the settlement is to negotiate with your buyer about what you want to get paid, and then you can seek it from the listing broker or the seller for that payment. All right, a couple local advocacy updates to get into before we get into the national stuff with Joe Harris, which is why y'all came. You didn't come to hear me talk. But I do have some important things. So Wellfleet has some new septic regulations. CCR fought these tooth and nail. We did used NAR's land use initiative to create arguments against these regulations. We fought them even before then. The Board of Health and Wellfleet wanted to move forward with passing these. We are looking into all legal options now that we have available to help homeowners who are going to be hit with this. So essentially what Wellfleet's doing is they are creating new trigger options where you are to install the best available nitrogen reduction technology septic system. So, what you know of as an IA system or an innovative alternative septic system, um, the language that most places are using now is best available nitrogen reduction technology. So DEP maintains a list of what that best available nitrogen reduction technology for a system is. But in the Wellfleet regs, they've done several things. You have to install a BANT system where new construction is happening, but they also redefine new construction. Typically, DEP has defined new construction as increased flow of the septic system. You would need to enter a new system. You would need to put in a new system, and that new system would need to be best available nitrogen reduction technology system. However, Wellfleet Board of Health has changed the definition of new construction to basically say any additional conditioned space. And that's a very broader word than increased flow, right? Because you may be adding onto your kitchen or even raising the roof, right? Like getting taking away space at the top of the and opening up the ceiling. Those are all going to be new conditioned spaces that, according to Wellfleet septic systems, they're going to be required to add in a BANT system, even when it's a working Title V for that. However, the Board of Health said they are going to give a lot of waivers, which speaks to favoritism, I think, and who to get those waivers, which is a problem as well. But so if you have clients who are being hit and required to upgrade, maybe even try to get that waiver. There is a real estate transfer trigger, which means a working, passing Title V septic system will be deemed a failed system upon transfer and required to upgrade. So if you have sellers thinking about selling in Wellfleet, they need to start talking to the Board of Health now. Because they will not pass a working regular Title V septic system without making that Title V system a best available nitrogen reduction technology system, which could be a conversion of the existing Title V, or depending on the system, it may have to be a whole new Title V system that is IA nitrogen reduction system. Also, cesspools. They are giving 6 months after the transfer in administrative consent orders to insert those systems as well. But I believe on the transfer trigger, you're going to end up seeing a lot of negotiation between buyer and seller on this. In the cesspool upgrades, they're going to make within 2 years require all cesspools to be required to take out their system and put in a best available nitrogen reduction system. That's the Wellfleet septic regulations right now. Like I said, we're looking into all our options. We're still looking into rollbacks. We've got a letter of the editor coming out on it. We've been fighting them and we'll continue to fight them on these new upgrades. We are for clean water. We believe there are better ways to get to clean water. And the Association of Preserve Cape Cod themselves says just going to IA systems does not help you achieve your water, your clean water nitrogen reduction goals. So Bourne is looking at allowing DEP regulations to take effect. So the town of Bourne is looking like they're not going to file notice of intent for a watershed permit. If you remember from the nitrogen sensitive regulations that came out 2 years ago, is you had 2 years for a town to file a notice of intent for a watershed permit. What that did was then say, okay, we're not, that does not, that delays and gets rid of the DEP regulations to require upgrades to working Title V systems. Bourne is looking at declining to file that watershed permit by July 1st, which is the deadline. If that happens and they move forward that way, as of July 1st, 2025, all homeowners in Bourne that won't be on septic, on sewer, will be required to upgrade to the best available nitrogen reduction technology system within 5 years, regardless of any triggers, regardless of new construction, real estate transfer, etc. Every homeowner would have to, that has a septic system now, will be required within 5 years to upgrade. There's a lot of equitable issues involved in this, and our public policy committee and board are working through our position to decide what kind of advocacy campaign we want to take, if any, around Bourne. But like I said, this seems to be not the way to go on water quality, as even the Association for Cape Cod said this won't help achieve the water quality goals. All right, as you may have heard this, by right accessory dwelling units regulations took effect statewide on February 2nd. So as of February 2nd, every property in the state, single family residential home, has a right to do 900 square feet or half the size of the principal dwelling, whichever is more. So if you have an 1,800 square foot house, you can do 900 square foot accessory dwelling unit. If you have a 1,500 square foot house, you can do a 750 square foot accessory dwelling unit. But you could do that, all that by right as of February 2nd. It can be detached or attached. It needs to have a separate entrance though. All existing non-conforming ADUs are protected. There's no owner occupancy requirement for the main house as well. Manufactured homes are allowed, and pre-existing non-conforming structures are usable as accessory dwelling units. So, but every town is going through updating their regulations. But they even without that, if you meet the protected ADU status that are in the regulations in state law now that are promulgated and in effect as of February 2nd, your client can do an accessory dwelling unit. Also coming June 15th, 2025 is a home inspection regulation. This was passed in the Housing Bond Bill last year, the Affordable Homes Act. It was slipped in at the last minute without much debate, and there's a lot of question about what this means. So it was supposed to go into effect December 15th. MAR successfully lobbied the Office of Housing and Livable Communities to delay this, as they pointed out all these questions that need to be answered so that contracts and contingency requirements and everything else can be updated. And you guys and attorneys educated on what this all means. All we have right now is what the law says. We expect, we know there will be regulations to further clarify what this means. So right now, all the law says is ensure that no seller shall condition the acceptance of an offer on the buyer's agreement to waive, limit, restrict, or otherwise forego a buyer's right to have the structure or unit inspected. Or a seller cannot accept an offer to purchase from a buyer who informs the seller either directly or indirectly that the buyer intends to waive their right to inspection. So basically, what we believe this is going to give them a right to inspect doesn't mean it's going to require an inspection. So, and just because they have a right to inspect doesn't mean there can be necessarily has to potentially be a contingency on the home inspection. Those are kind of the things that we're working on through the regulations. But this is not in effect. This is supposed to take effect June 15th. but the regulations have not been written. If there is an attorney or someone who's trying to tell you this is in effect already, that is not the law. So just wanted to clarify that. And that is what I've got. I think Joe is on. Do I have Joe here? Joe,
Morning.
thank you for
You
joining
have
me,
Joe
man.
here.
All right, Joe, great to see you. We've known each other a long time.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
it's great to see your growth and your experience now. As I've seen you rise up through NAR as well. But you worked on the Hill, you worked at NAR for a long time. You got vast experience in government advocacy for realtors at the national level. Um, so I don't know how you want to do this, but I want to kind of turn it over to you and let you kind of talk about how you guys are approaching new
Yeah,
administration, new Congress, what members can expect on real estate issues, and what NAR is talking about.
that's great. And it was very interesting sitting here and listening to all the things y'all got going on. You're keeping them very busy, Ryan. This is, I guess it's a good thing, huh?
Well, not really. A lot of the stuff we're just fighting against, right?
Yeah,
Trying to put on.
yeah. Well, we're doing the same thing on the national level, and it's like playing whack-a-mole at times. But I guess I should start by just framing my team a little bit. So I'm part of the advocacy group, which is headed up by Shannon McGann. She's our chief advocacy officer, and my role as vice president of government advocacy is really managing all of the lobbyists. We have lobbyists obviously on the Republican side, Democratic side, House and Senate. So I manage all 8 of our lobby team. Also, part of the government advocacy team is our federal political coordinator program. The FPC program is under my purview, and Victoria Givens does a wonderful job managing that program. We just had Advocacy Week here in Washington D.C. a couple weeks ago, and it's the first time we've done it. It combined RPTC and a couple other conferences into one. Efficiency is something you're going to be seeing. That's a name. So it's a term you're going to be hearing a lot more come from NAR. How can we do things a little more efficiently? Combine conferences, try to cut down on travel for members and for staff. And lastly, the Consumer Advocacy Outreach Program is also part of government advocacy, and that's headed up by Aaron Murphy. That's our program where we communicate, keep in touch with, try to grow the database of our, around 10 million plus contacts that we've acquired over the course of many, many years, trying to keep people engaged with issues that are important to real estate, important to housing. And so it's a robust group team. We work very hard, and it's a good thing, that we hit the ground running this year. I guess I'll start by giving you a little recap of what's affecting our industry and some of the issues that NER is planning to focus on this year in DC. So the first half of 2025 is really going to be all about staying on offense and trying to stick with our plan, but also realizing that there's some things that you can't control. There are a lot of things that are sort of presented to you, and you have to be able to be nimble and adjust, particularly with this administration, which is a little more unorthodox than previous administrations that we've worked with. But for the first half of 2025 and beyond, what I see is the most obvious thing they need to do is figure out what they're going to do on reconciliation. And that's the big bill. It's either going to be one big beautiful bills, as the president has put it, or it's going to be multiple bills, probably two. And reconciliation is a process that you can use when there's one party control of Congress, because it really only takes a majority of folks voting and present to pass a reconciliation package, but it has to be done through the budget committee. And there's certain limits on the types of legislation that can be passed through reconciliation, which is really a budgetary framework. It's a budgetary maneuver, so to speak. So You're limited in the types of bills, but you can package it and you can phrase it in a way where you can get pretty much anything done through reconciliation. So right now, we have government spending that runs out at the end of March that the Republican conference has to figure out how they're going to deal with. As you recall, this is sort of the bipartisan continuing resolution that passed last year, right before the election. Neither side really wanted to tackle trying to figure out the budget and the debt ceiling and all that, before the election, and they kind of punted to March to give the new administration, the new Congress, a chance to get its footing, get everybody installed. And I think we're still moving through getting, President Trump's cabinet installed. I think most of them have been confirmed, but that's really going to be the big thing. Figuring out what the spending levels are going to be for government spending. And normally, you would go through a process where all the appropriations subcommittees figure out, kind of work in a bipartisan way to figure out what the spending caps are going to be. Now, because of reconciliation, that process really becomes a partisan exercise. It becomes one party kind of dictating where they want the caps to be. And I think what you have is some disagreement within the Republican caucus conference about how much money needs to be cut from the budget, how much deficit reduction needs to happen. There's a difference in opinion with the hardline sort of Freedom Caucus type players, who are very consistent and very boisterous and carry a significant voting bloc of 12, 15 members that can really gum up the works. And getting all of President Trump had a lot of campaign issues, no tax on tips, salt, a lot of things that he has reiterated he wants to see done in a new tax bill. So in addition to figuring out where the spending levels are going to be, you also have the debt ceiling, which needs to be raised on the bills that the United States has already racked up. And then you have the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is set to expire at the end of 2025. And so this is the last time we had tax reform. It was TCJA under President Trump, 2017. Those tax provisions are expiring at the end of the year. And so they want to extend all or most of these tax provisions. But again, if you don't, that all plays together. How much the government is spending in the next fiscal year and how much of the tax provisions you want to keep, that all impacts essentially how much money the government is spending. And at a time,
but the government funding bill, the discussion between one bill or three bills that they're having, that's different from the tax bill, but based on that discussion, it'll be what they can do on taxes.
that's right, because you can't have deficit reduction on one hand and try to cut the budget, and then on the other hand, spend trillions of dollars in a new tax bill filled with, a new 15% corporate tax rate, for instance, which is what the president would like to have for multinational corporations who are producing in the United States. Right now, that tax rate is 22%. That costs money. That's real money. Salt. They're talking about doubling, something that we fought very hard for, which is fighting the marriage penalty, whereby you have a $10,000 cap for both single and joint.
And really important in Massachusetts is the
Yeah,
state
yeah,
and local tax deduction, which is that cap based on the amount of property taxes and state income taxes you pay
that's
of
right.
$10,000.
That's right. And so that's something that we've been fighting for a very long time. You have a number of Republicans who have basically drawn a line. Folks like Mike Lawler from New York saying we're not going to vote for a tax bill if it does not have some type of provision on increasing the salt cap. And the president has indicated that he supports that. And so that costs money. And then you throw in disaster relief because we've obviously had a lot of natural disasters. Uh, Hurricane Helene. You've obviously had the devastating forest fires in California, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to get relief with federal dollars to these impacted areas, and that's still an ongoing fight. So, folks are still reeling from a lot of the flooding in North Carolina and other places, and that all factors into the number. They want to know what the number is going to be, and so that to me is kind of where the fight is. And right now, we don't know whether this first bill is going to be just a continuing resolution type bill, which would be the path of least resistance, quite frankly, because then you're just extending government spending at the current rate. It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. The bad news is you're not making any changes to where the money's going, which is what you would need to do in a normal appropriations bill. You're just literally continuing resolution. You're just literally continuing funding at the same levels to the same programs, which is interesting because a lot of the programs, as you know, are under the chopping block. So there's a lot of discussion amongst the Democrats because they say, well, we're not going to vote for a bill that sends hundreds of millions of dollars to HUD, but you're gutting all the HUD programs. So where's that money going to go? So there's a lot of open questions right now, but it all hinges on the priorities that they want in a big tax bill, a big reconciliation bill that has a lot of the border stuff but then they need to fund the government. They do not want to shut down. And um, right now, the likelihood of a shutdown is, I mean, unless there's some major action that happens here in the next few weeks, that becomes a little more part of the equation than it was maybe a month ago
And,
because of
and
all the uncertainty.
and that deadline is what day?
March 30th,
Okay, and
end of March.
for our members, right? Like it's like government shutdowns, IRS stuff. It's
Yep.
FEMA,
It's
it's flood insurance, right? Is
NFIP.
flood
Yeah.
insurance tied to this right now? The
Yeah.
reauthorization.
Yeah. So there's, if you recall, they did a two-step, uh, they passed two bills, and they did that because a lot of the, hardline conservatives don't like this must pass legislation. So they wanted to do two bills that gives you two bites at the apple of trying to cut spending, and you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. So I think half the government programs or agencies, appropriations bills are under one bill, and the other one expires a week after, just to give them so that it's not a do or die. It's not a, you must vote for this or everything shuts down. So some programs will shut down the first tranche, and then the other programs will shut down the second tranche if it's not done. So on top of all this, obviously we have the executive orders from the White House, the tariffs, and how that impacts, what's going on with what they want to do long term in terms, when you talk about tariffs, there's going to be some type of economic response to that. And I think that's kind of an open ended question. So for the first half of this year, I mean, that's what we're looking at. That's the big sort of elephant in the room is how do we deal with the CR, the debt ceiling, disaster relief, and the tax bill that needs to be done. And my money is probably on something significantly done with regard to tax being pushed to later in the year. They've got to
Is
figure out all
there
this other stuff first.
anything in the government funding bill besides like flood insurance and things like that that might be on the chopping block that matter to us?
Yeah, there's some HUD. Obviously, anything that has to do with HUD. We support a lot of programs in the HUD space, a lot of low income housing tax credits, things like that come through some of these programs. But from our standpoint, the biggest thing is the National Flood Insurance Program. Obviously, you cannot buy or sell any type of real estate that's in a flood zone if you do not have the ability to get that insurance. And
And I would
that's,
think disaster relief is right behind that as well. As
yes, because we're way behind on the disaster. I mean, the Hurricane Helene, these hurricanes happen, 7, 8 months. It's been a long time. And unfortunately, in a lot of these areas, and I've heard Chuck Edwards and other folks in North Carolina talk about it, they're sort of on hold. I mean, you have obviously they're fighting with the insurance companies about getting reimbursed or but a lot of these areas where homes used to be, there's not really any infrastructure. Roads are gone, bridges are gone. So before folks can decide whether they're going to rebuild, the local governments and the state governments first have to decide if they're going to rebuild, if some of these areas are going to have a highway put back through them or have a bridge put back in some of these places, access roads. So until that infrastructure, internet, electricity, so until some of these things are figured out, and that relief and these grants and this money goes a long way to helping the government fund these things to decide, okay, feasibility, realistically, are we going to rebuild or are we just going to turn this into, is this going to just be a hiking trail? These are decisions that are kind of on hold for large parts of the country. So that's the big thing. So this is all happening, and in terms of what we're focusing on, again, our priorities going into 25 are very similar to what they were last year: expanding housing supply, and ensuring access to professional representation, making sure that realtors are able to do what they do best, and fighting against any efforts to curb commissions or change the way commissions are done. That's an ongoing thing. But we also have a lot of NAR research that we're pushing and that we're been getting out there. So, you know, updating America's tax laws to increase home ownership is basically our overarching goal. And within that goal, in fact, I'll just put something in the chat here. Within that goal, you have, a lot of different ways to go about doing it. And so all of our NAR priorities can be found flying.realtor. This essentially, I just put it in the chat. If you type in flying.realtor, you'll be able to see all these issues. And these are kind of a top line talking points on our priorities. Feel free to click on that, take a look. That document will change as the conditions on the ground change. So, that's what I would point to in terms of some of our priorities, legislative priorities. And they're,
Joe, in the tax bill, obviously state and local, we've talked about,
yep.
is there new tax opportunities or is it pretty much all defense?
So I think at this point is all mostly defense. Obviously, we want to preserve 1031, like kind exchange. The 199A qualified business income deduction, the 20% pass-through deduction is extremely important. We've polled and asked realtors about that. I mean, that's one of those things that they take advantage of. Obviously, opportunity zones, renewing that, expanding that. That's a priority. SALT, I've already gone over that. That's a priority. So really, when you're talking about all the other things that are going to be added into the bill that weren't there before, the no tax on tips, those types of things, that really takes away the opportunity to put other types of legislation in there. But we are still, um, we're
So yeah, it
right
takes
now.
away the idea of being able to do something on capital gains or be able to do something
That's
on
right.
home
Yeah,
buyer tax credits, things like that.
that's right. Like one of our big things was, tax credit, capital gains incentives for investors to sell rental homes to first-time home buyers. That's something that we've been having a lot of conversations with people on the committee about because, and the more homes in the market, which is doubling the capital gains exclusion on the sale of your primary
Yeah,
residence.
because everyone's got so much equity right now.
That's right. So a lot of things around capital gains, and we've got a lot of research on that. That we're pushing out and trying to figure out how to put it in kind of a one pager that makes sense for Hill visits for staff who don't normally sort of follow these issues. But yes, that puts you mostly on defense because you don't want to lose what you have, but you also want to keep fighting for those things that are going to make a difference and move the needle on the inventory piece on the supply side. And so that's sort of the delicate dance that you're doing now, because you really need champions that are in the room, that will fight for some of these things. But right now, everyone's trying to fight for their own provisions that they know could be on the chopping block. So it's constantly talking to folks on the Hill, seeing where they are in the discussions, having friends in there that are able to tell you this is where the discussion's going. We can use more research on X, or we can use more anecdotal stories on Y. But I think it's also a good time, because one of the things I did want to give some context, because we have a new Congress, but to talk a little bit about the election in 2024 and politically. I mean, we had a big year. We had, in terms of our RPAC dollars, um, you know, 3 months on, we've had, I think we did 452 races that we supported, that RPAC supported, federal candidates. 438 of the 452 won their election. That's a 97% success rate for RPAC. And that's really important, because one of the things that we look at the end of a cycle is, how are we using those dollars, and were we using them to the highest and best use, and did we get the results we wanted? 97% success rate tells a story. So in this new Congress, we've got 12 new senators, 63 new representatives, 74 new faces that the NAR lobby team has already met with. We've already met with every single last office over since the election. And so that is a story in itself, because when you spend that kind of money, you wonder what the impact is, not only on getting realtor champions elected and bringing them to Congress, but also in terms of what the parties are noticing. And one of the things that I think is a hallmark of what we do as realtors is, you have obviously Republicans controlling the House, retaining the House, taking the Senate, taking the White House, but you have all four Democrat and Republican leaders in Congress thanking us for the impact that we had on races,
On their
that
own caucus. So, like,
and their own caucus. I
both
mean,
the House
that's
Republicans and House Democrats are thanking you. Both the Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats are thanking you.
they're thanking us because we targeted races that were difficult for them, and our support is based on one thing only: who has helped us, who is in here trying to do the best they can for realtors. And a lot of times that means not playing in primaries when we know they're going to get primary from the left or primary from the right. Some of that is deciding in open races who's going to do a good job on our issues, the best job on our issues. So I think that's something that we should not gloss over. The fact that, in terms of support from Republicans and Democrats, we have them from both. Our issues are bipartisan issues. So that's one thing that kind of sets the stage for what we're doing now. It really didn't matter who ended up controlling the House, because we have friends on both sides. So we've had, in fact, I'll put this into the chat as well, because we've had a lot of good advocacy wins, and we created a website that's just for advocacy. NAR.realtor/advocacy wins. Not sure why they did. NAR.realtor/advocacy. Not sure why that didn't go through, but that is where you can go to find all of our political advocacy wins, policy wins, and we try to keep a running list, because one of the things that we talk a lot about is, what can we do to advance our realtor advocacy agenda, promote our priorities. And like I mentioned, it all begins with having a bipartisan strategy. We have the best grass tops operation in the country in our FPC program. Every one of our legislative priorities has bipartisan support. So I think that's something that we can start with, because people want to fight for things that are, could get support, bipartisan support, even though the process right now is an inherently partisan one. You still have a lot of groups like the Problem Solvers, the New Democrat Coalition, which is the coalition of pro-business Democrats. It's over 100 members right now. You have the Republican Governance Group, the RG2, which is the moderate Republican wing that are trying to work together with Democrats on certain issues. So, we still have our issues like more homes on the market, like I mentioned before, Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which would allow um, private, investment and tax credits for private investment, rehabbing and refurbishing homes. There are certain things that we can do to try to move the needle on housing inventory, but it's going to take help, bipartisan help, to get that done. Now, the
Now,
last thing
Joe,
I'll mention,
yeah, go ahead.
oh,
Go ahead.
is the House has a very narrow majority, right? Right now, I think they're down to one seat. A lot of those will be filled through special elections, simply because the Trump administration has absorbed two or three Republican House members. So that really creates an opportunity for a group like the Problem Solvers to come in and try to influence the tax bill, try to influence reconciliation. And I can tell you, having spoken to both co-chairs, Republican Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania, and Democrat Tom Suozzi from New York, that is a strategy that they're using to try to make this bill one that's going to appeal to the most, in effect, in a positive way, the most number of families, regardless of where they may fall on the political spectrum. But you were going to ask a question.
Yeah, so beyond the first 6 months, 9 months, 1 year that we're talking about now, and maybe this is just a lack of, maybe the answer is no because Washington at this point doesn't think beyond that. But are there things in year 2, year 3, year 4 you think of this administration? Like, do you see GSE reform being taken on at some point? Like, what are some of the bigger issues that NAR's had? Where do you see those happening in the next 4 years, or not at all? Because
Yeah,
Washington doesn't think that long term.
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, realistically, I will say that we've so I started work on the Hill in 2001 in the House of Representatives. I worked for um, Congressman Spratt for 6 years from South Carolina. Worked for
Yeah, I
Senator
thought
Lieberman.
about you when I saw you passed away recently, and
Yeah, no, it
thought my
was.
sympathies there.
Yeah, thank you. The Senator Lieberman, who passed away last year, worked for him as well in the Senate. So I've been in this town a long time, and what I'm seeing is the inability of Congress to be proactive on a lot of these issues. Um, you bring up GSC reform, and you should. It's been in the news a lot of late because they're talking about taking the GSCs out of conservatorship, which is where they've been since the financial crisis, which I think most people agree is probably a good thing. But the manner in which you do it, and to just release, if you're talking about recap and release, recapitalizing the GSCs and just releasing them um, to the private sector, that's when we have some issues. Part of what makes it work, part of the success of the GSCs, is that you have some sort of government guarantee, a government backstop, which
And just
makes
so everyone know, that's how you get a 30-year,
that's how
mortgage
you get a
this
30
country
year fixed
compared
rate
to
mortgage.
every other country that doesn't have that. But that
Yes,
fixed rate 30-year mortgage is because there's this implicit guarantee from the government through Fannie and Freddie.
that's right. And that's our red line in the sand, quite frankly, in terms of any of these reforms. We've had some friends on financial services who've said, "Hey, you're going to see some ideas out there. Please don't pounce on them. They're just ideas. They're just." But we're having the conversations. We're trying to underline the importance of that. But again, Ryan, this idea is only coming about in the context of finding a to pay for tax cuts on the other side. It's not coming from a place of, oh, they've been under conservatorship and we really need to do this in a responsible way. They're trying to raise revenue from this that they can use in other places. And so there's there's a lot to unpack there because you're making a very important drastic change that impacts the liquidity of the mortgage market. And that is our bread and butter. If people cannot find affordable mortgage options, then it's game over. And so we are very concerned about that. In the early going, we've made that concern known to the players that matter, folks on the Trump transition team, obviously our friends, Tim Scott, who's chairing the Senate Banking Committee, um, you know, and blank on his name, the new chair of financial services from
And
Arkansas.
Tim being one of those realtor champions that you and I
Yeah,
both know well, right?
yeah,
And owned a real estate brokerage even before he got into Congress.
that's right. And so it's really important that folks understand what's at stake. And I think it scares folks more when they see what's happening, where you have a federal funding freeze, and then everyone panics and nobody knows what to do, and then they unfreeze it because they're like, oh, we kind of jumped the gun there. We don't want that to happen with the GSCs. Like, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a system set up that can take the stress and can not erode away the confidence that a lot of foreign governments have in this system. A lot of the backing comes from other countries because they see it works. And again, the implicit government guarantee helps, but that helps all of us keep this thing going in terms of mortgage-backed securities. If they're not backed by anything, then it becomes a lot harder to make the sell. And so that's one of those things that I just if it's happening in the context of trying to find a pay for tax reform, all of a sudden that timeline's moved up because they have to say, "Oh, we're bringing in." I don't know what the last number I saw, but $2 billion or something. I don't know how they're going to do that out of recapping, releasing Fannie and Freddie. But if it becomes part of the tax reform discussion in terms of pay for, then that timeline gets moved up. But this is a process that needs to take some time, and it needs to be rolled out very carefully. And there needs to be a plan, a step one, step two, step three. We are talking about such a significant factor in the mortgage market. So something like that, I think it just depends on, my gut tells me this is something that is going to be a next year thing that they're going to look at once they get through all this other stuff. I think at the end of the day, the weight of the impact it can have on the markets causes them to pump the brakes a little bit on this idea. But then we also have things like insurance industry reforms. I mean, how many stories you hear about insurance companies just picking up and leaving entire states? They're not.
We're running into this right now in
Yeah,
Massachusetts. Cape Cod, home insurance, homeowner beyond flood now, homeowners insurance is rising rapidly, and there's
yeah,
less and less carriers coming in the market every year.
yeah,
Joe, question two, what can our members do to help you? Because, NAR's cut like well over 20 million out of their budget as they're downsizing, they're right sizing the ship, I guess, as Nikki would probably call it.
yeah,
And also to pay for the settlement and all that as they get that money. What can, your department probably got some cuts, although I think advocacy was spared a lot of them, other than what was just needed and y'all
yeah.
recommended. What can our members do to further help you and spread the advocacy message at the federal level?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, setting up on the legislative and policy priorities. We're also pushing out our research. If you go to NAR .realtor at the top, in fact, I can pull up here at the top. One of the top sort of, I'll put it in the chat here.
I think one of the big things too, Joe, is whenever our members are around our elected officials in various capacities throughout the time. But if you're with Congressman Keating or Senator Warren or
Yep.
Senator Markey or any of the congressional people, let them know you're a realtor and that they need to stay. They need to thank them for what they've done and ask them to keep helping the real estate community.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it all, at the federal level, really the biggest impact we can make is through the tax code, right? We don't get involved in zoning fights. We don't get involved in a lot of the local battles that you all fight every day. We do help, and assist through grants, through research, and I hope you'll use that. But one of the things that we try to impart to members that we talk to who may not be on Senate banking or financial services, but have an interest in housing, is to make the macro argument about how, we're real estate is a fifth of the economy. It's a major piece of the success, the macroeconomic success of the country. And so as real estate goes, really goes the rest of, the economy. And so we try to approach it from a big picture, not that it's going to be good for our industry, for realtors, but it's going to be good for the economy, which I think everybody cares about. It brings it back to being bipartisan. We also, and now's a good time to mention, we officially relaunched the Real Estate Caucus, a couple of weeks ago, during Advocacy Week. So the Real Estate Caucus is a bipartisan caucus made up last Congress of about 50 members, 25 Democrats, 25 Republicans. And they have four co-chairs, Congressman Tracy Mann from Kansas, Mark Alford from Missouri, Lou Correa from California, and Brittany Pedersen from Colorado. Two Republicans, two Democrats. Correa and Alford are former realtors themselves. And this caucus was really, it was formed last Congress through all of the negative headlines and stuff about the settlement and the New York Times articles. A lot of the members they just kept seeing these headlines. They had no idea what it all meant. And they also read a lot of it. And they said, a lot of this is BS. What can we do to help? And the idea came to form this real estate caucus. And really, the purpose of the caucus is more to educate other members of Congress who may not be as well versed as other members on how the real estate ecosystem works. What's the difference between a home builder and a realtor?
Yeah.
What role do mortgage bankers play? Like, these are very basic questions, but if your focus is armed services or the healthcare system, you know it enough maybe on what you see on Selling Sunset, which is always a dangerous thing, on what
And
you see on
especially with
reality
staffs,
TV.
because as you
Yeah,
know, like a lot of the staffs have never bought real estate before.
and that's right. And so this bipartisan real estate caucus is really intended for members to educate their colleagues on how it all works. Let's answer the questions. Let's let them present. And so we are actually going to have a kickoff event next month in Congress where we're going to invite all of all the staffers in the House to come and hear from Dr. Jessica Louts, and she's going to give sort of a state of the housing industry. And a lot of staff are very interested in realtors and the real estate industry from quite selfishly the standpoint of wanting to be homeowners themselves. They want to own condos. They want to know realistically what's it going to take for me to buy a house or buy a condo in this market. What are the housing trends? How much what's the down payment looking like? These are sort of the questions that they have, but you keep them interested and you bring them in with that sort of information, and then we're able to fill in the gaps wherever we need to. We're able to put Nadia and other folks on Lawrence's research team to work and answering specific questions that they have. If you look at the link that I sent on the research, you can go in, you can get as localized as you want on some of the housing stats and the housing data. And that's really to your original question about what you can do. This is information that we can share not only with your clients, but also with your legislators back home, mayors, city councilmen, and drill down into some of that data, because here, in Congress, that's how we move the needle on legislation. That's how we convince people that this is something that you need to care about. Capital gains is a great example. The idea that, well, in my state, you know, the capital gains is not that big of a deal. It's like, well, drill down the numbers. and it really does depend on where in the state you're talking about. And it may not be, as you go out into more of the uh, less populated areas, maybe it's not an issue. But when you're getting into some of these cities, which more and more people are moving, there's a migration happening in this country where folks are leaving California, New York, and moving to other states, and all of a sudden the housing prices have gone up. And so capital gains does matter, because if you've been in your house for 25 years, uh, and your wife passes away, your husband passes away, all of a sudden you're a single filer. That $250,000 cap gains, is not looking all that good. And what ends up
Especially, I
happening?
mean, especially we've seen in our, Massachusetts market, the
Yeah,
gains in the last 5 years, especially the
yeah,
Cape market, things like
yeah,
that. People had retired here expecting to stay here, and now they may have to move for some reason. They have all this extra gains coming through now. But thank you for joining us today. I've dropped Nick Scarcy's info in our chat box, so that's probably the best point of contact for our
yeah,
members to start with
yeah,
on issues for Massachusetts, right?
yeah.
He just started at NAR.
And he's great.
He's
Yeah, he's
great, and he
great.
understands our market. I've known Nick for years. He was at a local state association of realtors working before that, and then went to work for the Vacation Rental Manager Association. So he knows and understands the dynamics of our marketplace. So reach out to Nick if people have questions, probably on any of the issues you've talked about, and he'll be able to funnel them to the right person at NAR.
That's right. Yeah. And I appreciate you doing that. And Nick's great. He's hit the ground running here in a very short time and at a very busy time. But there's the thing is, we have a lot of influence here for obvious reasons. It's that we're in every zip code in the country, and folks want to know, obviously, what's going on with the federal stuff, but more importantly, they want to know what's going on back home. They want to have that information that they're obviously voting on federal legislation that impacts the whole country, but these members of Congress and these senators obviously have their respective states in mind when they're acting. And so we just want to provide them with the tools, stay engaged. A lot of new faces. Again, like I said, 74 new offices, and these relationships don't get developed overnight. It's going to take time to develop that trust. And my team is out there. They're making the effort. They're getting coffees, and they realize that it's going to take more than one or two contacts to create that relationship. It's going to take some information sharing, some building of trust, working on a few projects here and there together. But I feel like we're in a very good place to impact real policies here. A lot of the stuff, again, is beyond your control. You cannot control tariffs. You just you can, the home builders
Yeah, the
were the
real estate
first.
lobby is not going to affect the outcome of tariffs.
Yeah, I mean the home builders have done a very good job of the opening salvo of guarding against and warning the administration against things like tariffs on Canadian lumber, for example. But I hear that steel is next. He's going to announce some executive orders on tariffs on the steel and aluminum trade. So these are things that we're going to see how they play out. But I mean, they're going to impact the economy. So these are things we're monitoring. We understand. We're talking to folks, but we are trying very hard to make sure we stay focused on what we have come here to do, which is to try to solve the inventory issue and to educate people on it. Because we lost a bunch of people who really understood the issue very well. They retired. They went on to other things. So you got to really, with the new crop, you got to start all over again and educating them and getting them, sort of, not indoctrinated is not the right word, but, let them know how impactful our industry is and where the problems are. The problems are not, are not going to get solved by rent control. It's a supply issue. And that's a really important message, I think, to keep with folks who may see that rent's going up, 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 and Oh, how are we going to
Well,
do
yeah, we're
this?
actually showing it here locally. We
Yeah.
reformed one area of Cape Cod to allow more by right multifamily housing to use, and now people are saying rents are going down. It's amazing how production of units actually helps this, right?
Not everybody takes economics, man. I don't know what to tell you. It's been this tried and true principle for a very long time, and it works. It
Yeah.
works. But around here. You always have to guard against the politically expedient thing, the quickest fix, the thing that's going to get me to the next election.
Well,
And
and
so,
that's the one thing I wanted to stress to you, important to you is like you'll hear a lot, our members will hear a lot of news about a lot of different topics. FEMA's going away, this is
mm,
happening, right? There's a lot of headlines, and but beneath the headlines, there's a lot more to it, layers to it. And you guys will always put out what those layers are and how it affects our members at nar.realtor as well. So they don't to go beyond the headlines, just come to y'all's website for those advocacy updates.
yes, check it early and often. And all those headlines, I will say, do not panic. Do not, I mean, a lot of these are just trial balloons. One of the things I've noticed just watching this administration is they like to just throw some stuff out there, see what people think about it. Um, and, behind the scenes, folks are like hauling ass trying to get stuff out there, being like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. This is not. And they're just like, don't worry, we're just kind of, these are just trial balloons. These are just things. So, we're on it. And oftentimes we know about these announcements before they're coming out to everybody else. We're given a heads up, which again goes back to my original point about the importance of having those friends, having Speaker Johnson being appreciative of the work that we did, having Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, being appreciative. Like that's where it's important. It's important that they all see us as allies. So it doesn't matter which way the political winds are blowing or who's up, who's down. In 2 years, you'll likely have a very different looking House of Representatives, right? So you just have to be prepared for these things that change. And the unfortunate thing about politics now, as opposed to almost 25 years ago when I started on the Hill, is it is a spectator sport for whatever, for better or for worse. It was one of these things where you back in the day you elected people. Ted Kennedy, they did a good job. You kept electing them. In South Carolina, it was Strom Thurmond. Like you elected people, they did a good job, and you went about your life. You went about trying to make life better for your family. And now politics has become a spectator sport. There's a lot of foreign money that has been poured into the process to make it very polarizing, to make it so that Americans are focused on the things that divide themselves as opposed to things that they agree on. It is a very concerted effort by the Russians, Chinese, and others to turn Americans against one another. That is an uncontroverted fact. And so, if you're wondering to yourself, what, people weren't so angry about politics. Yeah, we disagreed on certain things. We had a lot more moderates in Congress. Now all of a sudden we have these firebrands on both sides. Like how does it happen? Well, it's we got to be very vigilant about the way that we talk to each other. The temperature in Washington is something I talk a lot about to all of my friends on both sides of the aisle. There's no need to call names and be disagreeable, but unfortunately, the a lot of the news media out there, they get ratings from it. It feeds a whole industry. And so what can you do as realtors? Don't buy into it. Don't feed into it. It's a very orchestrated effort because Russia knows they cannot defeat America straight up. They got to do it. The easiest way is just to have Americans tear each other from apart from within, and it makes it easier to defeat them economically. So, and that's history. I'm also a history major, so that's not anything new. That's what a lot of countries have done over thousands of years. So it's a cautionary tale, and it really does again point back to how we actually help the discussion. We don't get involved in mudslinging, name calling, even when we're running ads against a candidate, during the election cycle that maybe, Chuck Schumer wish we hadn't, or Jonathan wish we hadn't. We don't ever run negative ads. We do not use realtor money to tear down a candidate. We use it to build up somebody who we have a relationship with and thinks will do a good job. We think will do a good job. There's a big difference there. There's a lot of negative, nasty ads out there, but we do not use RPAC money to do that. And so that in and of itself, when we, because as you noticed, it was 452, 438 out of 452. That means there's offices that actually won despite the fact that we supported their opponent. And time and again, we hear from them, y'all ran some really good ads for my opponent. And I appreciate that you didn't, call me any names. You didn't come after me. That's very refreshing. So,
And what I'm sure you and I both found in our lives is that next they're also looking to see how they can get on your good side and be champions. So the next time you're running those ads for them.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And so we figured some formula out. I think it's not perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but I think it does work, and it's refreshing, and it's actually helpful at a time where people really want to find ways to work together. And so all of our bills, everything that's on the flying.realtor page that I put in the chat, they're all bipartisan, bicameral bills. They've been vetted. They have supported Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's really important. You can't, it's just this day and age, politics being what they are, you can't have these partisan bills. They don't tend to go anywhere. But when you have a record of having both sides supporting it, then it doesn't matter who the speaker is or who the president. It's just easier to get that conversation going for the next time, because it takes many years to get these bills implemented sometimes. So yeah, I feel like we're in a really good place with the stuff that we're talking about because it makes sense to people. Obviously, the cost is going to be something that we're having to, just like everybody else is. I mean, when you're talking about reconciliation, we're just one piece of the pie. You have a defense industry, a healthcare industry, a pharmaceutical industry. There are more players. There's a lot of folks sort of trying to get a piece of the pie. And so again, to the extent that we can talk about the economic impact, the impact on the economy, the impact on creating jobs, those are the types of things that tend to make you successful when there's so many competing interests all coming in, trying to get a piece of the pie.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. Like I dropped Nick's contact in the info. If you have
Great.
something to follow up with Joe on, Jen has dropped his. But neither one of them can get you to the person you probably need to at NAR, because there's a whole host of staff working on regulatory issues,
Yep.
working on legislative issues, and NAR really focuses on this stuff right there in Washington, D.C. for your benefit. So thank you
Well,
for joining
yeah,
us.
I appreciate the time and the opportunity, and y'all are doing some great work. I've known Ryan for a long time, and y'all are lucky to have him. I'll tell you, he does a great job and keeps the trains running very well there. So look forward to coming to see y'all in person soon.
Thanks,
Hopefully the
Joe.
weather gets a little nicer.
Love to have you. So have a good one.
All right. Thanks, everybody.